You said, I think men are incentivized to view behaviors that are damaging and even cruel towards women as normal. I think this is partially accomplished through exploiting natural biological features of males specifically, but also humans generally. Men are conditioned to tie their self-worth and to learn to value themselves based on the quality and quantity of women and sex they're able to obtain. Combine this with hypersexualization of men by exploiting, corrupting their child brains through a content exposure, typically at a young age. I'm not going to get into that, but it makes it easy and effortless for a lot of men to objectify and sexualize women without restraint.
Do you disagree with that? You don't think that it's very common in our society for men to
I'm just
objectify?
reading what you're saying.
I'm asking if you disagree with it.
I disagree that men are groomed into being abused.
I think abuse was a strong word and I shouldn't have said that.
Well, you used it multiple times.
By I'm defining it as the misuse or improper treatment of women and sex. So I think that men, a lot of like how our society is that it ties a man's self-worth to women in terms of...
You're very quiet, so just please very close to the mic.
Sorry. I think that a lot of men have their self-worth tied to sex and women and the quality and quantity that they can obtain. And I think that causes people to behave in irrational ways.
But it would seem to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I do get kind of the strong vibe based on, and this is a vibe check, right? But I do get kind of a vibe based on what you've said earlier in the conversation that you might be a little bit more on the leftist progressive side. Would that be kind of accurate to say?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So I'm guessing that you believe in some kind of evolutionary model?
Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, if that's the case, then wouldn't status, which is related to reproduction, be a thing which would be very evolutionarily advantageous?
Yeah.
Well, then why wouldn't society conduct itself around that?
I think status is a normal thing to desire, but I do think that it is kind of exploited in our society.
What do you mean?
Where I think there's a lot of indicators when you're growing up that tell you as a man that if you don't have a woman in your life or if you aren't able to sleep with a bunch of women, that you're not a high value man.
Yeah, but from an evolutionary standpoint, reproduction is the primary edict, right?
Yeah.
So then the man who reproduces the most would have the most status. That kind of makes the most sense, doesn't it?
Sure.
So, I mean, so then it seems that if reproduction is the primary edict and having sex with lots of women, we could assume leads to lots of reproduction, I still don't understand why society wouldn't kind of foment itself around that. Right?
I think that it makes sense that it would form itself around that, but I think it's also overemphasized in a way that...
Well, I mean, we have a birth rate crisis, right? Like, shouldn't we be having more babies, not less babies? So, I mean, wouldn't reproduction of the primary edict matter here? Like, wouldn't that matter a lot? But like all biological entities, their ultimate purpose is to reproduce, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, if that's the case, and man wants to reproduce a lot, which is what he was evolved to do, assigning status to that seems like it makes a lot of sense.
I think it makes sense, but I think it also can lead to people doing questionable things in the pursuit of that status.
Yeah, sure.
Everybody
but I mean,
wants
anything you would assign status to could be the case, right? Like anything, literally anything. Having 2 pennies in your pocket, and that is somehow a status marker for humanity, would still lead to all sorts of different outlier problems, right?
Sure.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't really understand why this is a big problem. It seems like it's evolutionarily advantageous.
I think the idea is reinforced that you don't have value unless you have beautiful women in your life or if you're unable to have sex with many women.
Yeah, right. But I mean, if you're not adhering to the primary edict, wouldn't you have less value? The point is to reproduce, right?
What if you're doing it and you're not reproducing?
Yeah, so I mean, that does bring up a whole different can of worms, which is what happens when you allow a society to fornicate without reproduction. It seems to lead to terrible outcomes. I completely agree with that. But the question still remains, I don't really understand how you would organize a society if reproduction is the goal without assigning status to those who reproduce. I don't really even know how you could do that.
I think in some ways that by tying, like overstressing or emphasizing this, like how we tie our self-worth or value ourselves based upon sex and women is kind of what contributes to the problems that we're having between men and women.
Okay.
Because if men are doing everything to try to access sex or like have sex with as many women as they can and using women and betraying women, then it's going to leave a lot of women in a position where they're
aren't they evolved to do just that? Aren't they evolved to spread their seed far and wide to as many women as possible? Isn't that hugely advantageous to humanity?
I think what's hugely advantageous is for two parents to raise their child together. That is the most likely.
Well, I mean, that's going to require reproduction and status. So like, let me give you an example of what I mean. Let's say a man has a family, has a wife, and he has 4 children. Mm-hmm. And that man acquires more status in society because he has a wife and 4 children. And we adhere to that, and we say, oh man, that's some kind of status indicator. Do you think that men would be more likely or less likely to do that?
I think men would be more likely to pursue that.
Yeah, exactly. I agree. I think that men would be far more likely to pursue that. So then why wouldn't we, instead of the progressive mantra, push society towards that family unit and give it status? Like, that makes no sense to me.
I think right now we live in a society where people are valuing themselves on materialistic possession.
I totally agree with you on that.
And I think that includes turning women into materialistic possession.
I completely agree with that too, but I think that that's not because of status. I would say it's because the opposite of that, right? So if you had higher status, if you didn't value materialism, wouldn't less people value it?
If you say that again?
So if you had a higher status in society by not valuing materialism, wouldn't less people value it?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, it seems like we should, instead of saying we should get away from, status, it seems like status isn't really the problem, but rather what we're valuing that gives a person this status in society.
Yeah, I think I would definitely agree with that.
Yeah, so it sounds like a nuclear family is the thing that has the most, or should have the most status, right?
Yeah, I would agree with that. But I think the thing I'm trying to point out is that in our society, that's not what we value. We value material possession and money. And
yeah, but that's because of feminism, right?
I would disagree.
Well, I don't understand. Are feminists the ones who are out there who value the nuclear family? Because last I checked, they were doing everything they can to dismantle it.
I don't know what all feminists believe.
Okay, well, are you a feminist?
I mean, I've never considered myself one, but I probably would if you sat me down and tried to define it.
Yeah, okay, so then feminism is a rejection of patriarchy. That's what it is at its core, right?
Sure, but I'm getting married and going to and having children. So
yeah, I know, but do you reject patriarchy?
You can be feminist and still value a family unit, loyalty, monogamy, and raising children. And
yeah, you can be a feminist and value all of those things. I agree, but feminism is a rejection of patriarchal systems. They reject patriarchal. Like for you and your husband, let's give an example. Do you want you and your husband to be equals?
Yes.
Okay, well that's feminism. So that's not an embrace of a patriarchal system. You're not saying I want my husband to be the head of the household. I want to be equal with my husband. Right?
But we live in a patriarchy.
I'm sorry, what?
You're saying that the problems we're having are due to feminism, and I don't understand how you're making that connection when we live in a patriarchy.
Do you think that the patriarchy is stronger or weaker than it was 100 years ago?
Probably just as strong.
Really?
Yeah.
So you think that women going into the workforce and things like this enabled the patriarchy?
I think if the patriarchy...
You think 100 years ago we had as many female leaders, we had as many females who were in charge of different systems, who were CEOs, who were in charge of corporate, you really believe that?
No, but I mean, isn't the point of patriarchy that it's the people at the very top that are controlling everything, and the people at the very top are like predominantly men?
Well,
and
no,
it's always going
it's
to be that way?
scalable. Like it's scalable, right? So you can have the people at the very top, but it goes all the way down to the family unit, with the man being held in the charge of the family unit and not the woman. So the responsibility tends to fall on the man, right? That's
I
why
don't think
women
it
didn't have bank
necessarily
accounts,
has-
they didn't have credit lines, things like that.
Hey, Andrew, I think our internet's back. Sorry, our internet crapped out there for a couple seconds. Andrew, you getting us? It's still kind of.
Yeah, I got you.
Looks like it's getting, sorry guys, I don't know what. No, don't. Oh, it's kind of crapping out. Andrew, you still got us?
I still got you.
I don't know, sorry. Something's full minute.
Yeah, the quality went way down.
Yeah,
Uh-oh.
hold on. We're just, give us just one sec here. While we're waiting on that, just going around the table, do you consider yourself a feminist?
No.
Starting with you.
I would say humanist.
Humanist, okay.
No.
Into the mics, guys. You can't wave, you gotta
No.
speak.
No.
No.
No. No. Recovered.
Recovered feminist, okay.